And now we will have Ms. Kramer to do the roll call.
Thank you. Jeff Anstead.
Present.
William Barber III. Veronica Carter.
Present.
Randy Haven O'Donnell.
Present.
Chairman Jim Johnson. Vice Chair Marion Johnson Thompson.
Present.
Carolina Fonseca Jimenez.
Present.
Deepak Kumar. Danelle Lobdell. I see her, but I didn't hear her, but she's off mute. Well, I will go ahead and mark you as present. Marilyn Marsh Robinson.
Present.
Naima Muhammad.
Present.
Rodney Sadler Jr. Carlos Velasquez.
Present.
Elke Weil. Sherry White Williamson.
Present.
Lamicia Whittington.
Present.
Thank you. I will turn it back over to you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kramer. Everyone, all of you, I should say, have received the November 30th meeting minutes in the meeting packet last week. I would like to now entertain a motion to accept those minutes.
I'll move the minutes.
Second. Thank you. Renee, do you have those names?
Was it Randy Haven O'Donnell and Sherry White Williamson? Yep.
Yes. Great. So moving on to new business, I want to welcome DEQ Secretary Elizabeth Beiser. Secretary Beiser, thank you so much for joining us today. And I will turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Johnson Thompson. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Thanks for the opportunity to share a few updates with you today. I'd like to start with some news that affects this advisory board directly. We are welcoming a new member today. I'm so excited that Lamicia Whittington has agreed to join you and add her voice and expertise to this board. I have really enjoyed my conversations with her. I think she'll add just such a wonderful perspective to the voices of this advisory board, and I hope that you'll enjoy getting to know her as I have as well. So we'll have a chance to meet her in just a few minutes, but I did just want to officially welcome you to the board, Lamicia. You all also have received a copy of the revised charter, and so the primary change was to update the membership requirements. So what we've done is we've removed the specific seat designations in favor of a broader membership description that's modeled after the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, or NEJAC. So it now reads that our members shall include, but not be limited to, representatives of academic institutions, environmental organizations, community organizations, local governments, and Native American Indian tribes. So my goal for the members of this board is to represent the diverse interests, people, and perspectives of the folks in North Carolina as a whole, and I'm going to use that to guide me as we look to fill the remaining vacancies. And that way we're not, we've got a little bit more latitude in looking at great skill sets to help round out this board as we're doing with Lamicia as well. So thank you, Lamicia, for joining, and looking forward to adding additional folks to fill those vacancies. We've also made a few consistency changes. The operating procedures you approved in the past had language about members serving 2-year terms. So we're also adding that language to the charter for consistency. Many of you were founding members of the board in 2018 are now nearing the end of your second term. I value the advice and counsel that you've given me since I've become secretary at DEQ. I also know that serving on this board is a serious commitment of your time and energy. So as we approach that 4-year mark in May, it's a natural time for us to check in with you regarding your willingness to continue to serve. So I certainly hope you all will continue to serve, but I certainly understand that each of you has a variety of time demands and that you need to make a decision that works best for you. So we'll reach out closer to your individual term expirations to confirm your choice for the future. But regardless of your decisions, I just want to take a moment to thank you for everything that you have done and continue to do for our department, for your communities, and for our state. Since we last met, Governor Cooper signed Executive Order 246, affirming North Carolina's commitment to clean energy economy that benefits every community in our state. Dr. Johnson and I were both honored to join the governor at that announcement in January, which builds on some of the work that DEQ and this board have done together. And it sets up some exciting efforts across the administration. Jimmy Bellamy, the governor's policy advisor on environmental justice, is here today. We'll share some updates on EO 246 and the next steps on some key provisions. Also wanted to mention to you that in April, DEQ will host some public meetings on the draft general permits to add digester systems to animal feeding operations. And based on your recommendations, we are holding 4 public meetings, including 1 each in Sampson and Duplin counties. We've also provided 60 days of notice for those meetings and a 90-day comment period. The public meetings are going to be facilitated by an independent moderator. We've posted translated versions of the draft permits and are exploring the feasibility of interpretation services during the meetings. We're committed to a transparent and open process as we develop the general permit as required by session law. Also, want to go back to the last meeting here for a moment. We are deeply committed to equity in the distribution of the federal funding available to North Carolina. And since we last met, our team has done extensive outreach to identify communities without access to water and sewer infrastructure who could benefit from that $1.6 billion in federal funding that's available this year. So we're working to make sure that funding benefits the communities that need it most, and certainly benefited from your advice in the last meeting. Shadi Eskoff, our director of the Division of Water Infrastructure, will be here to provide an update on that application process and our outreach since we last met. In addition to that great discussion we had in the last meeting, many of you also personally provided information and guidance to our staff, and I'm looking forward to the presentation today from Dr. Courtney Woods on the specific infrastructure challenges in Sampson County. We'll also have an opportunity to hear from our sister agency, DOT, to share information on the Clean Transportation Plan process. I think that they will benefit from the same advice that you all have given us, and I am really excited about the process that's underway at that department. As I've said before, there's a tremendous amount of work ahead. We have some unprecedented opportunities to make a difference across the state, and I look forward to your thoughts and guidance as we're moving forward. So thank you for your service, for your advice, and for your support of our work here at DEQ. So with that, Chairwoman, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Secretary Advisor, for that exciting update. And as you have mentioned, we are so delighted to have a new board member, and I am honored and pleased to introduce her, Ms. Lamisha Whittington. Ms. Whittington joins us today representing the North Carolina Black Alliance and Advance North Carolina. Now I would like to turn it over to her to introduce herself and let us hear some things about you, Mrs. Whittington.
Thank you so much, Vice Chairwoman Johnson-Thompson. Thank you, and Secretary Advisor, thank you for the warm welcome to the board, to community. It is definitely an honor to be sitting amongst you all and your confidence in me and joining this board. Many of you have invested in me over the years, and so I know a few of you, and just thank you for your love, continued support. I just want to honor Ms. Marilyn, Ms. Naima, Ms. Sherry. Thank you for always investing in me, and so I have to give honor where honor is due. I am an Afro-Indigenous woman. I hail from the Appalachian Mountains, but have been in the capital and have served Eastern North Carolina for over 15 years. And so was reared and birthed in the tradition, deep North Carolinian tradition of family, mutual aid, and faith and love. And so just really here holding that hat above all else, even though I do hold as Vice Chair, Johnson-Thompson mentioned, Deputy Director of Programs for the North Carolina Black Alliance, Deputy Director for Advanced Carolina. I also serve in the capacity of a board member of Cape Fear River Watch, serve as an National Academy of Sciences community liaison with the testing for PFAS as they are developing their CDC clinical guidelines, and offer social scientist feedback when needed and will called upon. And I also serve as an adjunct professor both Meredith College in the Department of Sociology and Diversity and Environmental Justice in the Department of Culture and Natural Resources of NC State. But again, above all, it's my people. I love y'all, and to the folks who are listening in. And I believe my mom is also listening in. So thanks again for the support. All right. And Vice Chair, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Whittington, for that very exciting and loving overview of your diverse background. And it already makes me very excited to know that I'll be able to work with you. We have not met previously, though I know you've met others on the board. So thank you for joining us. Next on the agenda, we have Mr. Jimmy Bellamy to present some information about Executive Order 246 signed by Governor Cooper last month. Mr. Bellamy serves as a policy advisor in the governor's office. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Bellamy. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and I apologize up front for not being on the camera. I have been working to try to get my camera up, and for some reason it will not turn on. But anyway, good afternoon all. My name is Jimmy Bellamy. As previously mentioned, I am a policy advisor here in Governor Cooper's office, where I work with the Department of Environmental Quality. I work with the Department of Transportation, the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, and the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. And so as a part of my portfolio, I work alongside Dion Delegati on environmental justice. And so I just want to thank you all, Secretary Beisel, for your leadership, the board members for all that you do, and just thank you for giving me a few minutes just to speak. I just want to take this time right now just to give some high-level updates on where we are with Executive Order 246, and specifically as it relates to some of the more specific environmental justice provisions. Next slide, please. And so as you all know, Governor Cooper signed Executive Order 246 that essentially reaffirmed North Carolina's commitment to transition to a clean, equitable economy. So this order recognizes that climate change and environmental justice are connected, that they're intertwined, and that they must move forward together. And in order to do so, we need to call on an all-of-government approach. And so that's essentially what Executive Order 246 is trying to accomplish. And so in that order, he outlined some statewide climate and clean economy goals for emission reduction statewide, and then some specific transportation goals in terms of zero-emission vehicles. Next slide, please. And so throughout the executive order, there was an emphasis on underscoring the importance of environmental justice and equity. And so these are some of the more specific provisions that relate to environmental justice. And so we have the environmental justice and equity considerations, essentially saying that all agencies must now consider environmental justice in the decision-making process. And so one of those steps that we took was appointing an environmental justice lead. And I think upfront, it's important to acknowledge a lot of work has already gone into this with the NJR Task Force, a lot of the recommendations. And so these aren't necessarily new ideas, but we're really trying to build off of the work that's already been done. And so on last week, I believe there was an announcement for the agency environmental justice leads. And we are really excited about that team. We think that they bring a lot of leadership qualities to the team, and that they're excited to do the work on that. And so with those environmental justice leads, we are really looking for individuals who are leaders and who are equipped to help bring and move forward this discussion as agencies make their decisions. And so really the purpose of that was to establish that interagency effort. And we know that within this executive order, the environmental justice leads are going to play a really important part in moving that forward. And so to date, what we're working on specifically as it relates to the environmental justice leads, we are sourcing out right now to try to get some training and some foundational level setting done with the environmental justice leads. So we're right now vetting to find some trainers to come in, and we're looking at probably doing about a 2-day workshop with the environmental justice leads and some of the cabinet leadership on environmental justice, looking at the historical and current impacts of environmental justice, and really helping to identify how each agency touches and impacts environmental justice and the roles that the agencies play in environmental justice decision-making. And so that's something right now that we're currently sort of working through to identify some training opportunities for these specific environmental justice leads. And so the next provision that was outlined was a public participation plan provision. And the governor directed each agency to create this PPP by 1 June of 2022. And so what we've done, we've engaged with the Regulatory Assistance Project to develop a model plan. And that plan should be complete by the end of March. And then we will share that plan with agencies to sort of further tailor and develop and seek input on that plan. And we thought it was really important to sort of develop a model plan based upon some feedback. So recently, the Regulatory Assistance Project had created basically an access survey that was sent out to the public and hopefully shared with others to really get some feedback in terms of what are the best strategies and what are the biggest issues that the public faces when engaging with agencies. And so that survey right now is ongoing, but I have received good feedback that they have gotten a lot of feedback and that they're hosting a lot of phone calls as they work to develop that model plan. And so again, by the end of March, we anticipate on having that plan complete, and then we'll share it with the agencies. And so amongst that, with the public participation plan, we're also working with the Regulatory Assistance Project to develop a foundational training, again, for the EJ leads and a lot of the communication teams to implement this model plan and sort of emphasize the best practices, understanding that we need to frankly do better in terms of public participation and making sure that engagement is meaningful and that everyone has an opportunity to provide input and that input is heard and considered when agencies are making decisions. And so that's what we're working towards. The next point we have is the stakeholder input process. I can tell you this is something that we are really excited about. And we currently are in the process of vetting out some third-party facilitators. We're looking for people who have a certain level of expertise, I guess, in environmental justice. And we would love for them to be here in North Carolina or be local to North Carolina to come in and sort of do some of this facilitation work with us. But we're excited about this stakeholder process because this is really a workshop and we look at it as a partnership to really engage, to identify what specific steps that the governor can take in terms of executive action moving forward to advance environmental justice and equity. And so some of those issues that come to mind up front are cumulative impacts, looking at that, looking at what North Carolina can do around that, looking at how can we better incorporate public health data to make it more accessible, and any overlap that we have with any existing tools that we already have on environmental justice and improving those issues. And so we're really looking at that as a collaborative sort of think tank to sort of work through some of these issues. And I know that a lot of individuals have already been putting in a lot of work of what they think should go into an executive order. And so we want to use that time to engage with that and really work through those issues. And so right now, again, we're still working to try to vet through who could be that third-party facilitator. And I'll put a plug in now that if you all have any recommendations, please provide them to me, and we'll certainly reach out and coordinate with them as well. And then the last one is the distribution of state and federal funds. As you all are well aware, President Biden at the beginning of this year signed an executive order which created essentially the Justice 40 initiative. And I think on last week, they rolled out a new beta sort of testing for a screening tool. And so we're working to sort of implement what they're doing on the federal level when it talks about delivering 40% of the benefit and funding to communities. And so we're working towards that, still trying to think through, again, what that looks like and how it's going to be implemented. But again, we want to use a part of the stakeholder input to discuss that and figure those things out. And I think zooming out big picture, obviously Executive Order 246 is not a specific environmental justice executive order. But we understood that it was really important to put it, to understand that this was the first step and that we really wanted to come to the table in good faith and really work through the issues and really figure out what can be done specifically to move forward on environmental justice and equity. And so we understand that this is a first step, but I think this is a good first step, and we look forward to working with you all and consulting with you all as we develop this process and moving forward with environmental justice and equity. And so with that, I will turn it back over to you, Vice Chairwoman.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Bellamy, for that very informative overview. I'd like to remind the committee that if you have questions or comments, please give them to Ms. Kramer, who will forward them to Mr. Bellamy. Next, we will hear from Dr. Courtney Woods about water quality and public infrastructure access in Sampson County. Dr. Woods joins us from the UNC Gillings School of Public Health. Dr. Woods, I will turn it over to you now.
All right, thank you so much. It's great to be here with you all today. I am not accustomed to using WebEx very often, so I'm gonna ask for your grace and apologies if I'm a little slow to get the hang of navigating the slides. Anyway, I'm really excited to be here to talk with you all about some of the work that I've been doing over the last several years in partnership with residents in Sampson County. This work is a product of really strong and deep collaborations with residents there, with EJ Can, which is a community organization led by one of your very own members, Sherry White Williamson, as well as some collaborations with Appalachian State. So I'm going to talk about some of the previous work that I'd done prior to that collaboration, and then some of the work that we've been involved in over the last few years. Is someone navigating my slides for me, or do I have control here?
Yes, Dr. Woods, India Bryant is navigating the slides. So whenever you're ready for the next slide, just go ahead and say next slide.
All right, next slide, please. All right, before I dive into the work, I really did want to just give credit to the amazing students who have contributed to this work. It's a mix of masters and public health students at UNC who are working with a new initiative called the Environmental Justice Action Research Clinic, which we began just last year. I also mentioned Ms. Sherry White Williamson and her colleague Daniel Kuntz, who are both members of EJ Can and natives of Sampson County, along with Mr. Ellis Tatum, who invited us to participate in this collaborative work in Sampson County. Also want to acknowledge Naima Muhammad, who has always served as an important advisor for community engaged work that I've been involved in, as well as the collaborators, students, and faculty at Appalachian State. Next slide. All right, so I've lived in North Carolina for 18 years now, and I'm still learning the geography and don't know where all the counties are. So I don't ever assume that folks know where a particular place is. So I thought I'd at least orient you a little so that you know, at least geographically, where Sampson County is, and share a little bit of the history that I've learned. So Sampson County is in the eastern part of the state. It's one of the 70 counties in North Carolina that's classified as a rural county. It is the second largest by area, and as you can see, it's in the coastal plain region of North Carolina. It's within the Cape Fear River Basin, which is really important given the prominence of environmental contaminants that have surfaced in this particular river basin. There's also lots that Sampson County is known for nationally. I think it's known for the hollering contest, which happens in Spivey's Corner. And I think my granddad, who was a farmer in South Carolina, probably would have been an amazing contestant in that contest. Sampson County is also home of prominent African-American businessman John Merrick, who is the founder of the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance, and home of parents of Charles Chestnut, who was an African-American, well-known African-American fiction writer. And Sampson County is also one of 2 counties that's home to the Kohari tribe, and they have their intertribal center in Clinton, North Carolina, which is the county seat for Sampson. I think for a rural county, it's fairly racially diverse. It's about 50% white, 20%, approximately 20% African American, another 20% who identifies Hispanic ethnicity, about 1.2% Native American. It is ranked as a Tier 1 county, and as you know, that's based on a range of economic indicators, as well as population growth. And then I also just wanted to note that, you know, it's host to several major environmental hazards. So while, you know, I think nowadays most folks have an eye on Robeson County as being both a Tier 1 county and also hosting lots of unwanted land uses. Sampson County is perhaps not as widely known by others as having a similar situation in terms of some of the environmental hazards that it's hosting. Next slide. So you all may already know that it is one of the 2 highest ranking counties for hog production, and ranks as the top county for turkey production, and I think broiler production as well. I recently heard a presentation by the Cape Fear Riverkeeper last week, who described swine CAFOs as the biggest threat to the Cape Fear and other waterways in eastern North Carolina. So many would argue that this is perhaps the biggest environmental health issue in the region. There's been enough research to demonstrate the health impacts of these facilities, as well as the disproportionate impact on low income and communities of color. Next slide. What you may not know is that Sampson County also hosts the state's largest landfill. And so the Sampson County landfill receives about 1.5 million tons of trash per year. That equates, comes to about, I believe, 10% of all of the waste that's disposed of in North Carolina, except waste from all of the counties. There's currently 2 sites there that are monitored. There's a pre-regulatory area, which means that it's not lined, and then another area that is lined. So it was constructed post the RCRA regulations. And so this landfill accepts both municipal solid waste landfill waste, construction and demolition waste. It's also the recipient of Chemours industrial sludge, which you'll see is really important to some of the work that we've done. And they also receive tri-fuel ash, which is not widely advertised and also not a term that's easy to find. But tri-fuel ash is a combination of burned wood, tires, and coal. And so this, you know, in terms of the discussion around water quality in Sampson County, you know, while there is an area that is unlined and certainly poses an important hazard to groundwater, as is the lined area. So lined landfills are not fail-proof. Many would argue that it's not a matter of if, but when a lined landfill might fail. And there's potential for the leachate to which is the sort of water that percolates through the landfill, for that to contaminate groundwater, as well as surface water that runs off the landfill. And this image is just a picture from the one of the cells that was being dumped into. It's also worth noting, though I don't have an image here, that Sampson County also hosts the wood pellet plant run by Enviva. So there are, airborne contaminants that come from that, but also the deforestation in the region that results or is necessary to supply that plant really removes a natural environment that's important for taking up contaminants and preventing erosion. So it's another potential impact on water quality. Next slide. So I've been in Sampson County collaborating with residents there since about early 2018. And I first learned about some of the issues and concerns that residents had at the North Carolina Environmental Justice Summit. Mr. Ellis Tatum, who I mentioned earlier is a resident there, came to present primarily about the landfill, but also talked about the deleterious impacts that the industrial animal agriculture was having on residents as well. And he invited anyone, so researchers who might be interested in collaborating to gather the narratives of residents and figure out what sort of health or environmental work could be done to support the residents. Invited them to come collaborate. So two NPH students who were working with me at the time were able to conduct a sort of focus group. It's a method that uses photography in a focus group manner, where you focus on a particular image that residents have taken, and then you talk through some questions to get a sense of what kinds of concerns the residents have. And so it's a qualitative research method that we use to help sort of guide what sort of research they might be interested in doing. From that work, we learned that, there were lots of nuisances, both from the landfill and hog houses, including odors and buzzards and noises from the landfill operating, almost 7 days a week. Lots of concerns around water quality, both the quantity as well as the quality. Some themes around mistrust in local officials as well as water service came up, and then lots of concerns about just the cost burden of either having to buy bottled water or to treat their water. So one resident talked about having spent like $3,000 to $4,000 on water treatment mechanisms. And here are just some of the quotes from residents that we were able to capture from that photo voice work. And I think Naima actually helped provide some research support for that work. From there, we were really hoping to, based on what we heard from residents, We felt like the landfill was an unstudied or understudied potential source of contamination for residents' water. And there was also, I think, given the emergence of Gen X as a really important contaminant in North Carolina, we were also interested in understanding whether some of the whether we would be able to detect any sort of migration from the landfill of contaminants that might be specifically associated with the Chemours facility. So we, over about 4 months, gathered samples along a creek just on the backside of the landfill. We collected samples upstream, very close to the landfill, and downstream. And we were interested in looking at PFAS, these perfluoroalkyl substances, or forever chemicals, as you all may know them, as well as heavy metals and nutrients. And so some of these compounds, are common at landfills. Others might indicate some other source contaminants. And I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly, just to get to some of the other work that we've done. So to summarize, one of the most important findings, we conducted measurements at the Sampson County landfill as well as at the Orange County landfill. And we anticipated that, some of the perfluoroalkyl substances that are common in consumer products, that we should be able to pick both of those, or we might be able to detect both of those at both landfills. And that if we were to detect any of the novel PFAS like Gen X or Naphion, that we might anticipate seeing those at the Sampson County landfill where the sludge was being disposed of. And that hypothesis proved to be true. We were, some of the first bars to the left there are samples collected far upstream of the landfill, so we're not seeing any detectable levels there. Very close to the landfill where you're seeing those tall, colorful bars. That's the cumulative PFAS, so we measured about 25 different compounds. So that's the sum of all of the concentrations.
Dr. Woods, we're not seeing the slide.
Oh, sorry.
And yes.
I think I'm forgetting to tell you to go to the next slide. There we go.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. All right. So, so the tall bars on the left show the higher levels of PFAS measured at sites very close to the landfill in Sampson County. And then farther downstream, we're still able to detect it, but not as significantly. That second set of bars were taken at the Orange County landfill, and at least for the concentrations were generally much lower there. And then if you look at the yellow graph to the right, you'll see that Gen X was barely detectable in Orange County, but we did see modest levels at the Sampson County landfill. Next slide. And then for PFOA, which is a more common PFAS compound, which you might expect to find in consumer products, we were able to detect higher levels at sites close to the landfill, but not upstream. And we saw about the same levels at Orange County and Sampson County landfills. Next slide. And then this is not work that we did, but just to show some a study or some measurements that were conducted by a private lab, and this data is publicly available. on NCDEQ's website, where they looked at, they measured PFAS and leachate from, I think, about 10 landfills across the state. And what we noticed, I think this is data from 2020, that several novel PFAS, including at the bottom, you'll see the star, that's for Gen X. You'll see that the levels are much higher at Sampson County than, I've just included one other reference here, Wake County. So it's barely detectable there. Some of the other stars there are for other novel PFAS. So in summary, next slide. We offered several recommendations here that there needs to be more frequent monitoring of surface and groundwater wells at the Sampson County landfill, that PFAS compounds, in particular the novel PFAS, need to be added to. So right now, I don't think they're measuring for PFOA or PFAS. So those at minimum, and certainly some of the novel PFAS need to be among the chemicals that they're monitoring for. And there should also be monitoring up gradient and down gradient of the landfill proximal sites. There should be free testing of residents' wells who are in close proximity to the landfill. We argue also that at least now that we have some indication that there's migration of leachate from the landfill into natural waterways, into the surrounding environment, that the Kenmore sludge, there should be a new location that's identified for disposing of that. And then also there's been lots of advocacy for lowering the current drinking water limits for PFAS, and as well as regulating that as a class as opposed to the two compounds now, PFOA and PFAS. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to try and get through this as well. I think I may be close to my time. I also wanted to just highlight some of the current work that we're doing, that's certainly inspired by the work around the landfill. So as I mentioned before, we're collaborating with E.J. Can and Appalachian State. And we're providing free water tests for residents really across the county. And the goal is both to, determine the extent and type of contaminants that residents may be exposed to. We want to be able to provide them with some data around their water quality and understand how their perceptions of the exposure risk might result from having that information. We're currently measuring heavy metals and nutrients, so that work is being handled by Appalachian State, and then our lab at UNC is taking care of the PFAS and fecal bacteria. I don't have any results to show for that. I do think at last report, we've tested about 60 residents. Maybe 10% of those were showing some sort of elevated levels of metals or nutrients. Very few of those at the moment for fecal contaminants. And then we're in the process of working on the PFAS. And then some work that we're doing with publicly available data, next slide, please, is to conduct some spatial analysis to look at water hazards with respects to water infrastructure. And the hope here is that we can identify communities that we might describe as high impact. So meaning that they're in close proximity to hazards, but are also, within stone's throw or within fairly close proximity to public water infrastructure. This is a really busy map, I know. This is the light blue is showing the extent of public water lines through the county. The yellow dots are representative of animal feeding operations. There's some other NPEDs, permit facilities, pre-regulatory landfills, and other water hazards. We focused on identifying water hazards here. Next slide. So oh no, the images aren't showing up here. What you should be seeing here is two maps of Sampson County that are shaded for, on the left, it's for the number of hazards that are within 1,000 meters. And so we've looked at census block groups, I think was the lowest that we had data for. And so we're able to shade each of the block groups based on the number of hazards within the block group. And then on the right, we're also shading the map based on distance to public water infrastructure. So again, the hope is that we can use both visual inspection as well as some statistical analysis to identify parts of the county that are close to hazards, or that have multiple hazards close by, but are also really close to infrastructure. Next slide. Okay, this map showing up. So this is similar to the other one, but we've also shaded some of the block groups now for, actually these are blocks for race. So we're also really interested in understanding if there are any correlations between where infrastructure and or hazards are located based on race. And at least some initial analysis that we've conducted shows a pretty strong correlation between socioeconomic indicators in the state, or excuse me, in the county, and race. And so that's the graph on the right, on the left. But we haven't yet done that statistical analysis on all of the spatial data. Next slide, please. All right, I think this is close to my closing slide. And this is just to offer them, we're really interested in taking a systems approach to understanding how rural residents' water quality might be impacted. And so this is just showing, from the individual to interpersonal to the sort of living and working conditions and broader societal and regional and national factors that might contribute to residents' water quality. Many of these are out of our control. We can't necessarily control the height of the water table. We can't necessarily control the frequency of flooding, but there are other factors here that I think we can certainly understand, quantify, as well as contextualize with residents, and determine what sort of association there is between these factors and their water quality. And then my last slide is just to, oh, you don't have my last slide. My last slide is had an image of all of the other amazing colleagues at UNC who are doing really great work, some community engaged, but also doing some important work to understand rural water quality. So I'll stop there because I think I might be close to my time, and I want to make sure I at least offer some space for a few questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Woods. You've given us some great information, and much of what you have spoken about, really, we have discussed. So it's good to receive affirmation from your work, as well as some good data. Now, we weren't going to ask for any questions because we were going to go through this, but since you have finished a little early, We have about 4 minutes if anyone wants to ask any questions of Dr. Woods. I should also remind you that if you have questions or you think about them later, you can pass them on to Renee. And also, Dr. Woods, I noted that you had recommendations to DEQ as well. So that's very good.
Madam Vice
So
Chair,
go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you, Dr. Woods. As someone who lives downriver of Sampson County, the Cape Fear River, and gets her drinking water from it, and someone who lives downriver from Bladen County, I just want everyone who might be geographically challenged with southeastern North Carolina to understand that they are taking the coal ash sludge from a poor part of Bladen County with Keymoors and taking it and putting it in a poor rural county next door in Sampson County. So we don't have just one EJ community that's impacted. We've now done cumulative impacts on 2 EJ communities in 2 totally different counties that have downriver effects for all the folks that are getting their drinking water from the Cape Fear River. So, you know, this is just incredible about how much work the state has to do to clean up its mess. That's all.
Dr. Johnson Thompson, obviously I'd like to thank Dr. Woods for the partnership at this point and the work that she's done. And I want to point out the fact that the Department of Solid Waste actually has authority to consider cumulative impacts in their permitting process, but this is the first time that there has been any analysis of a landfill in Sampson County. And this, as Veronica just said, goes to show that there is a lot of work that DEQ has not done that they need to do to protect the communities that are most vulnerable.
Thank you very much. And so we will move on to the next topic, which is related.
I had a question, Marion. My hand was up.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Yes.
That's okay. I thank you, Sherry, for bringing that up because I was going to ask regarding landfill. I know that Durham and some of the other areas right in central North Carolina send waste to the Sampson County landfill. And so, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Is there any conversation at DEQ Solid Waste about putting more responsibility on individual counties to address their immediate solid waste needs? Is there any conversation? Because I'm on the board for Orange County, and we're trying to uplift that conversation yet again.
Is that for me, Randy?
It's for anybody who can tell me if something is moving forward.
Can I ask you to give that response very quickly so we can move to the next item, please?
I'm not aware of any work that's going on at this point. The DEQ does have the authority to do it, but I'm not sure that what types of conversations may be going on at this point.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next speaker is really addressing a related issue on water. And it will be from DEQ's Division of Water Infrastructure, whose director is Mr. Shadi Eskaf. And I'd like to thank Mr. Eskaf for being here today to provide the board with an update of the funding opportunities that some of us began discussing last meeting. Director Eskaf.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. Thank you everybody for asking me to present basically an update from our last meeting. And if I have the ability to share slides, thank you for providing that. 1 second, I'll pull up the slides. Okay, hopefully you all can see it. So I'm going to go relatively quickly to give you an update since our last meeting in November on what we're doing with water and wastewater infrastructure funding. Some of this is related to the previous presentation, which I really appreciated. Thank you. And then also talk about some of the outreach activities and some of the work that we are planning to do as well. So we're not done with everything. There's always more to do, and we plan to do a lot more as well. So last time we talked about funding opportunities, but we hadn't yet communicating what was going to happen with the American Rescue Plan Act grant funding that's being administered by the department for water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. So since the last meeting, we had developed a ARPA administration plan, which we had posted in December as a preliminary proposed administration plan, and we went through a public review process and completed that public review in January, adjusted the plan according to the comments that were received, and presented the plan that we have for water and wastewater grant funding under ARPA. That was presented on February 10th on a statewide webinar that DEQ hosted. We had over 200 people attend that webinar. We recorded it. The recording, as well as the 8-page ARPA administration plan, are on our website. We've communicated those extensively, and I'll be talking about some more of the outreach activities that we've done since then towards the end of the presentation. Part of the ARPA administration plan was to address the fact that the ARPA funding wasn't just available for everybody at the same amounts. Some of the funding was in the state budget was categorized for specific purposes or for specific reserves. So there's more funding available for utilities that are serving economically distressed areas. And you can see here, I'm not going to go into the details of all this, so I'm happy to answer questions if you're interested. But the funding was kind of split between local governments that are designated as distressed according to the State Water Infrastructure Authority and the Local Government Commission, as well as funding available for at-risk communities and all other local governments and nonprofit water corporations. So there's different pots of money, and there's more money available for those that are designated as distressed, slightly less for those that are at risk of being designated as distressed, and then even less for those that are neither. As far as what's available for our program to administer as competitive funding, the state budget had actually already allocated some of the ARPA funds for specific projects, and we're administering them as directed. But all the other funding that's available is about over $750 million of grant funding that we're administering in a competitive process. Some of the funds are also available for stormwater projects. We are going to be working with the State Water Infrastructure Authority to develop a plan for the stormwater funds because it's a new program, and we need to come up with stormwater priority rating systems, and I'll mention some of that in a minute. But the focus I wanted to bring to the group is that is this pot of money right there for the at-risk funding. So in addition to funding that's being administered for local government units that are designated as distressed, or those that are at risk of becoming distressed, which means they're either small systems or systems that are exhibiting financial difficulties in managing their systems, those are eligible for the at-risk funding. But we've also added another component to that funding as well, and I'll go through that in the next slide. So we've made eligible projects that are serving at-risk areas for this at-risk funding. And that's important because the eligibility for this at-risk funding provides larger grant opportunities for all local governments across the state. So by qualifying for an at-risk project, there are higher grant limits available, and there's more funding available than these other funds that were in the other category. There's only 54 million in the other category. There's 191 million in the at-risk funding, and we made that, we opened that up for all local governments to address this kind of a project for at-risk communities. And the project is essentially to, if the primary purpose of the project is to connect residences in disadvantaged, underserved areas to the water and sewer system, regardless of what the local government economic status is, that would be eligible for at-risk grant funding. So there's grant funding available to specifically connect homes in disadvantaged, underserved areas to the water and sewer system. with some conditions. When we say primary purpose, it means that at least 75% of the project itself is dedicated to that purpose. So it's, really it's the purpose of the project is to do this work. That makes it eligible for the funding. It's only for voluntary connections, so you're not able to, or local government wouldn't force homes to connect to the water and sewer system. And the funding would also provide and cover the connection fees that are associated with connecting homes to the water sewer system. So we've heard from a lot of communities and from some of the research that's already been done that is one of those obstacles, that homes are interested or homeowners are interested in connecting, but they can't afford the connection fee. Well, this grant would basically pay the connection fee on behalf of the homeowner to the local government. So those connection fees would not be charged to the residents. When we say that the funding is, or the project is to serve disadvantaged, underserved areas, we provided guidance in the application process. Essentially, if there are a couple of ways that an applicant would show this is a project area that meets this criterion. If the project area is within a DEQ community mapping system, potentially underserved block group or tribal boundaries, they can just show that in their application, say the project is in this area, that would qualify them for this funding. But we also know that sometimes census block groups are not fine enough or narrow enough to be able to capture all of the disadvantaged communities. There may be smaller pockets of disadvantaged communities within larger census block groups that don't show up on the map as underserved or potentially underserved. So we've also suggested that if applicants know of those kinds of communities and they're planning to work to provide access to communities within a census block group that doesn't show up on the map as potentially underserved, but they know it is, they can provide the narrative and explain using some of the metrics or some of the information that you see here to make a case for why that area, what that project area would qualify as disadvantaged, underserved. The funding, again, is available to all local governments, and we're trying to, in all of our outreach regarding ARPA, we talk about this type of project funding because we're trying to educate. This is a new type. We've always done this through the community development block grant, infrastructure grant funding. This is now opening up with ARPA to provide even more funding opportunities for local governments. Local governments would be eligible up to $15 million grant limits in the spring round to do this kind of a project. And additional funds will be available in the fall if there are funds remaining after the spring rounds. Spring applications are due May 2nd of this year. And we also made change to the guidance documents and to the rating system so that a project of this type would qualify for up to 25 points for drinking water, up to 15 points for clean water. Those are pretty significant points when we're reviewing priority rating systems and projects that come in. This is a significant number of points that would make a project like this competitive against other kinds of applications that we'll be receiving. And I'm not going to go into the details, but this is kind of what we showed in the guidance document as an example of what they would propose, what applicants would need to show in their application. A screenshot of the map showing where the project area is going to be, the narrative explaining what they're planning to do, as well as a project budget that supports it and shows that the project really is focused on providing those connections in disadvantaged areas to the water and sewer system. Last time around, we talked about the priority rating system and how we, State Water Infrastructure Authority has already approved the rating system that provides through many different ways additional subsidies as well as additional eligibility and additional prioritization to applicants that are in economically distressed areas. And these are some of the metrics that we use to assess and to provide additional subsidies or to provide additional prioritization for applicants that come in this way. This rating system is still active and still what we're going to be using for our water and wastewater construction projects. We may be working with, or we intend to talk to the State Water Infrastructure Authority to review these indicators and to talk about whether or not we need to adjust them going forward for the fall 2022 onwards And some of the discussion we had last time was helpful in that regard because we got some information that we want to present to the State Water Infrastructure Authority. I will also say that one of the questions that came up was whether or not this rating system really addresses the needs of all of the disadvantaged, underserved areas. We heard, in an earlier presentation, again, Justice 40 set the goal of 40% of the benefits of federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities. We have Executive Order 246 as well that focuses federal funding to disadvantaged communities. Even though, so these criteria address disadvantaged communities, kind of focus on the economically distressed indicators, but we took a look at some of the past awardees and in the past three funding rounds, essentially. Past three funding rounds means in the past year and a half, because there's two funding rounds per year. In the past year and a half, more than 50% of the funding has gone towards to local governments or census places that had higher percentages of population age 65 and above, non-white population, people on public assistance, people who speak English less than very well, that's the census definition, lower median household income than the rest of the state. So even though they're not directly addressed through this rating system, there's some correlation here, and more than the 40% goal has already been, we already meet that 40% goal, but we can always do better. So that's something that we want to keep looking at going forward as well. So we're going to be doing some of that research internally. So that leads me to the last slide here, which is what we're planning on doing. So we've already been in communication when it comes to the water and wastewater access in communities, and you saw in this previous presentation, Sampson County is an example where there may be communities that need access to water and wastewater, don't have access, and it might be a financial reason, it might be other reasons. We took a first step at trying to address that by providing more funding and to do a lot more outreach with the funding on that front with ARPA, but we are planning to do more. We are engaging with partners to talk to communities to find out more information about what's happening at the community level, as well as the local government level, and what can we do to change our funding programs to address some of the obstacles and some of the needs that are out there in North Carolina. So we're doing that through different ways with partners as well as internally. I know that the EJ program team has done surveying and communicated with communities. They were looking at potential communities where some of these issues might be, and communicating directly with those communities and local governments. We're going to continue to do that and explore other ways to try to address this question. I mentioned, looking at the Justice 40 metrics. It was brought up earlier that the EPA had, or not EPA, but the federal government had produced a beta version of the map. We're going to be looking at our distribution of funds to see how that matches Justice 40 as well as EO 246, as well as other priorities for the board, as well as internally with DEQ. On outreach, we have a lot of things going on these days because of the ARPA funding. So in addition to the webinar that we did on February 10th, we're presenting the ARPA plan in many different avenues. One of which was 2 days ago, participated in a presentation that was organized by the North Carolina Black Alliance and Democracy NC and North Carolina Conservation Network. We talked a little bit about this kind of funding. We actually had a very good conversation follow-up with somebody from Sampson County because of that webinar. So I appreciate the opportunity to participate in that webinar. We've also got additional presentations scheduled. Stormwater funding. I mentioned that we're going to be developing a rating system for stormwater. We have 2 listening sessions, public listening sessions, that we want to listen to the public on what the public would like to see prioritized when it comes to stormwater funding. That's on March 4th and March 10th, and that's going to be important for a lot of communities, especially communities that face a lot of flooding. We imagine there's a lot of interest in talking about funding that goes to those types of projects, as well as addressing disadvantaged community needs. We have reached out to the historically underutilized business program office, and we're going to be meeting with them to talk about not just stormwater, but we're talking about just all of our funding and ways that we can engage to make sure that there's availability and there's access to the funding and the opportunities for all businesses and underutilized businesses to participate in all the infrastructure funding that we're going to be funding. And then we're also doing, actually right now, today, we were doing our third of 5 funding application trainings. The one that we were doing today was done as a hybrid, in-person and virtual. We had over 200 people attending that training, and we're recording that training, so hopefully we'll be posting it pretty soon for potential applicants to know more about our funding. And we plan to do further follow-ups and engagements. So we have other conferences, other presentations to do, but really we want to be also focusing on communities and reaching out to communities. So that's going to be part of our work going forward as well. I think that's the slides that I've got. So I'm happy to take questions if there are any questions, Chairwoman.
Are there any questions, board members? We have time for one question.
Madam Chair, this is Jeff Anstead. Madam Vice Chair, I'm sorry. I got a question. A lot of your information is going out, but it seems that it's missing all the tribes in the state of North Carolina. And I would like to, we have a North Carolina Commission on Indian Affairs who's run by Greg Richardson. I come from the Hallawasaponi tribe in Halifax and Warren County. And the definition of underserved community, you would go to an Indian tribe and you would see it. Is there any way that we can get this presentation or your presentation, or have you present with the North Carolina Commission on Indian Affairs, or also tribes in the state of North Carolina?
So we have not presented the ARPA plan specifically for that group. We'd love to have an opportunity to do that. So maybe we need to just reach out. I know that all of our announcements, all of our press releases and media advisories are going out to inform the public about our applications, the ARPA plan, the listening sessions we have for stormwater. So all the public engagements that we have going on, and that goes out to the DEQ's EJ list. And I don't know exactly who's on that list, but I'd like to follow up with internally here and with you all to make sure that we're reaching out to everybody. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Sir, thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Escaf. Next, we will have Board Member Veronica Carter, who will provide us with an update from the subcommittee established at the last meeting to help advise DEQ on outreach efforts around the DWI funding opportunities that were discussed by the director. Ms. Carter? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. We met last Monday, primarily due to just trying to get everybody organized, and talked about some of the things that we actually heard about today. And so I'm quite interested in hearing back from what the staff has discovered on community participation program and engagement. So we'll talk about that. But a number of us met and we decided that we were going to focus on some things called education, behavioral change within DEQ, training, and stakeholders meetings, and local engagement. And when we say education, we think that that's not just for our the public, but it actually is for DEQ, for the staff, for every area of DEQ to understand what EJ and equity is all about. Now, it sounds like some of that is about to take place across cabinet agencies because of the executive order of the governor, but DEQ is the primary cabinet agency for this. And so if all of the staff in DEQ does not understand what environmental justice and equity is all about and what it entails and what it should entail and how to look at things like cumulative impact and how it should and can be used to slow down or stop permits, then we're probably not going to make headway with the other cabinet agencies either. So I think there is some more work just from today. I made some notes that we need to talk a little bit, make sure that we're all on the same sheet of music and find out what the PPP public participation program is all about, because it sounds like a lot like what we discussed, as well as what the cabinet leads training, the 2-day workshop is going to look about, because that too was something that we discussed. And so, Madam Vice Chair, you were part of our meeting as well. I invite any of the other members who are on to jump in quickly so that we can respect everyone's time. Have I left anything out, folks? I know Elke is not here with us, but Randy, Marilyn, Madam Vice Chair, comments? Did I leave anything out?
No, I think it's really important to see where the recommendations that we had made, where there's cross-pollination with the things that have been mentioned today, those 3 strands, particularly the PPP program and the training of leads. I think it's very important for us to have not siloed conversations, but joint conversations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I was a little interested in hearing about that, since I'm not sure we got that input last week. So we'll leave off at that. We have another meeting scheduled the end of next month. I remember this is still February 28th, the end of March. So we look forward. If anyone would like to join our subcommittee, please reach out to me and let me know, and we'll send you the invite as well. Are there any questions for us? Comments? Staff, Carolina was also there. Any comments, questions?
Veronica, I think I'm good, but I think that you covered it really well. So I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation and, of course, getting more information on the specifics for the public participation plan and the training. So sounds good to me. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. And we do want to mention that we are very cognizant of the fact that whatever we do needs to be in not just English. And Jeff, we would reach out to you as well. I was reminded when you mentioned the statewide organization for the tribes. We were guilty of not including that in our conversation. So if you want to join us, or at least, knock me in the head before we meet next time and remind me, I will be happy to ensure that we include the tribes in whatever plan we come up with.
Any other comments? Thank you, Veronica. Yes, I was in that meeting. I think you did a good job of doing the overview of what we discussed. So our final agenda item for today is an update on the clean transportation plan mentioned in Executive Order 246 and the medium heavy duty zero emission vehicle state action plan. This presentation will be led by Ms. Jen Weiss from the Department of Transportation. Ms. Weiss.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So thank you so much for inviting me to come today. I'm in that coveted end of the day location, but hopefully you will find this all really interesting. I'm going to switch you all from water into transportation. So here we go. So again, thank you for inviting me to come today. My name is Jen Weiss. I'm a senior policy advisor for the Department of Transportation for climate policy. And I've been there for about 4.5 months, almost 5 months. Previously, I was at the Nicholas Institute at Duke University, where I think I know quite a few of you. So it's good to see some familiar faces on the call today. Joining me today is Robin Barrows, who you know from Department of Air Quality. Robin will be giving you an update on the medium and heavy duty Zev action plan, which is now rolling up into the Clean Transportation Plan. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. Renee, next slide, please. So as Jimmy mentioned earlier, Executive 246 was signed by the governor on January 7th, 2022, and it builds off of Executive Order 80. So in addition to all the great things that it outlines for environmental justice, which Jimmy talked about earlier, it does also outline quite a few things to address emissions in the transportation sector. those of you that have read the recent greenhouse gas inventory from DEQ know that transportation now is the #1 emitter in the state. And so it is up to all of us to start to think through together how to start to reduce emissions within this sector. So two of the things I want to point out how EO 246 builds upon Executive Order 80 from 2018 is that the total number of registered zero emission vehicles, so that's battery electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, the goal has increased from 80,000 in 2025 now to 1.25 million by 2030. So that's quite an increase, and it's something that all of us together are going to be needing to think through and develop plans and strategies for, and that's a little bit what I'm going to talk about today. The second one that is new to the executive order is to increase the sale of ZEV so that 50% of in-state sales are zero emission by 2030. So that means when people are going to purchase cars, we need to be educating and helping them to think through the buying decision so that they're purchasing a zero emission vehicle instead of a gas combustion engine vehicle. And so part of my goal with the Clean Transportation Plan is to help us all think through how we're going to get to these goals by 2030. Next slide, please. So the Clean Transportation Plan is designed to be broad stakeholder engagement. So we have 15 months to put together the plan, so it's due by April 7th to the governor. But over that 15 months, we want to look at a variety of things, and it's not just focused on zero emission vehicles. We do, of course, want to look at increasing the availability, sales, and usage of ZEVs, not only in the light duty, but also in the medium and heavy duty ZEV areas. But we also want to look at reducing vehicle miles traveled, because the less miles that we travel in our cars, the less emissions that we generate. We want to look at building out our infrastructure, not only for electric vehicles, but also different alternative fuels. We want to make sure that there's equitable access to clean mobility options, and that can include vehicles, but also non-vehicle options, and increase those non-vehicle transportation modes where they're needed. And then we'll look at other relevant topics as they come up. Like I said, this is a broad stakeholder engagement plan. And so we encourage and we want people to be telling us of other things that we should be considering as we look to reduce emissions in the transportation sector. Next slide, please. So the objectives of the plan are to do a couple of different things. It's not just to develop a plan, it's also to build awareness and share best practices of things that are going on outside of North Carolina that we can bring to our state to decarbonize the transportation sector. But we also want to bring awareness to everyone about the different options that are available. And so as we are reaching out to talk about different opportunities, challenges, and considerations, we also want to be doing education about all of those. We definitely want to have a focus on underserved populations and communities, and that's one of the things I'm going to talk a little bit about later and ask for some of your input on. And then the end result is to develop actionable strategies with an emphasis on near-term goals. We do not want to end our 15 months together with a plan to do another plan. We want to dig in. We know the time is now to start to think through these strategies. And so with all of your help and others, we want to develop these actionable strategies that we can just go out of the gate and start to move on. And finally, we always want to track what we're doing. And so we want to develop accountability metrics to make sure that what we are doing is actually getting us where we want to go. And so we'll look at things like ZEV registration, ZEV sales, but also environmental justice metrics and workforce development. And we'll work with stakeholders to figure out what those metrics should be. Next slide, please. So I mentioned stakeholder engagement. We're doing this in a couple different forms. One is an advisory committee, which I've established of 18 individuals representing different sectors. This one is going to provide strategic direction for the planning process for the Clean Transportation Plan. Want to make sure that we're getting input from others on where we're heading, what we're doing, the timeline, and the process involved. And then we're going to have broad public stakeholder meetings. We want to make sure that we are able to bring everybody to the table to discuss things that are going on in the transportation space, and also to do that education component that I talked about earlier. This also will give us an ability to reach a much broader audience to learn about the challenges and the opportunities facing us in the transportation sector. Finally, we're going to go through, well, not finally, but the next group is work groups. These are deep dive groups that are going to dig into some of the things that we're already talking about and develop these actionable plans that we're going to use to form the Clean Transportation Plan. So I'm looking for 10 to 12 experts, maybe more, in a couple of different groups, which I'll discuss, that are going to help us dig into specific work group topics. And then finally, we'll do targeted outreach. This can be to impacted communities by doing listening sessions. This can be doing surveys. This can be doing focus groups. Really love your input on how we reach out to people that might not be able to attend any of these other groups, but want to be involved in the process. And so I'm open to all of your ideas on how to best do that. Next slide, please. This is a lot of words. I'm only putting it up here because I know you got the slides. This is my advisory committee that we put together. As you can see, I have one representative from multiple different organization types, including 6 of the agencies here at within the state. And so what I'm really trying to do is get just expertise from a large group of people to bring different perspectives to the advisory committee as we're setting the stage for how we reach out to the rest of the stakeholder group. Next slide, please. So here are the work groups. I mentioned that we are going to be doing deep dives into work groups and coming up with these action plans. As I mentioned before, all 5 of these work groups build off of current work that's already being done. We're just combining them all into one umbrella under the Clean Transportation Plan so that we can learn from each other, share ideas, and build our plan together. The first group is the Zev Plan 2.0. Some of you might remember that back when Executive Order 80 came out, DOT was $80,000 by 2025 goal. Zev Plan 2.0 is going to take that first Zev Plan, brush it off a little bit, pull out the things that we haven't been able to do yet, add a few more, and help us figure out how we're going to get to the 1.25 million Zev goal by 2030. The second group is what Robin's going to be talking to you about in just a few minutes. It's the medium and heavy duty Zev action plan. This is something that builds off of a multi-state MOU that was signed by Governor Cooper back in 2020. And this action plan has been developed by a group of states throughout the Northeast, including North Carolina, to really figure out where are our hotspots, where are the places we need to go to be thinking about the transition of medium heavy duty vehicles and how do we get there. And so Robin's going to give you an update on that and how we do outreach to impacted communities to learn more about the needs that they are experiencing. The third group is a fleet transition plan. So this is looking at a variety of different types of fleets, including the state vehicles and all of our agencies, local and government vehicles, private entity fleets, school buses, anything that has a large amount of vehicles. We want to be thinking strategically about how we transition them over to either electric vehicles or clean fuels. The fourth is a vehicle miles traveled task force, looking at ways that we can reduce vehicle miles traveled. This is also something that's already underway, but we're going to be doing a deeper dive into different kinds of travel demand management reduction strategies. And so this group is going to be looking at things beyond ZEVs and vehicles. It's going to be looking at biking or walking or passenger rail or other non-vehicle modes. What are the different ways that we can transport people around the state the way they need to do it while reducing emissions? And the last one is a huge one, but it's the clean transportation infrastructure. This will include not only the electric vehicle infrastructure that we need to make sure that everyone who purchases a ZEV will be able to charge it, but also looking at alternative fuels, whether that's propane or compressed natural gas or hydrogen. What are the other fuels that are out there, and that might be something that'd be interesting for us to consider transition to. So those are the 5 different work groups. They're going to be doing, like I said, deep dives. I'm hoping that I will have people that with strong expertise in each of these areas that can dig in, bring their different perspectives, bring their different voices to it. I really encourage any of you either on the board or on the call today that are interested in any of these groups to get in touch with me and let me know so that we can get you involved with it and hear your voice as part of this. Next slide, please. I do want to mention that across all 5 of these work groups, we have cross-cutting themes. We recognize that when you're doing deep dives, sometimes you might forget different components to it. And so I'm going to ask that each of the work groups look at all of these different, is that 6? Different 6 bubbles on this slide. So that includes equitable access. When we're thinking about our transition to ZEVs or reducing vehicle miles traveled, we need to make sure that everybody is included in this discussion and can give us feedback on the best ways that they can get access to some of these tools and vehicles. We also, as I mentioned before, want to make sure education and outreach is a key component of all of the plans that come out of this. So we are thinking through not only what the strategy is, but how we're going to implement it and how we're going to educate the larger audience on what we're doing. Incentives and financing always come up. Shadi talked earlier about the funding they have on the water side. We need to be looking at how are we going to fund the work that we're doing together. This can include funding from the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I think some of you might know about the National EV Charging Program, which was just launched, and DOT will be deploying charging infrastructure throughout the state. But there's other funding sources that we can look to help us with this transition. We definitely want to look at the economic and workforce development opportunities within each of our recommendations. How does this help each of our communities? And then how can we build our workforce up to be able to do a lot of the work that we'd like to get done? So we want to be using that lens as we're considering our strategies. Health impacts, obviously very, very important. What are the health impacts of our decisions and what we are trying to do? Making sure that we're always constantly thinking about, why we are doing the things that we're doing. And health is definitely a key component to it. And then finally, as we're thinking through our strategies and our recommendations, what are the policies and programs that need to be put in place to make these happen? So whether that's a legislative policy or a regulatory change, want to be thinking through what needs to be done in order to move this forward in the near term. Next slide, please. So here's our timeline. As I said, the executive order was signed on January 7th, and if you go all the way to the right, April 7th is when the final report is due. We are right at the beginning, and so I have not even had my kickoff meeting with my advisory committee yet. That should hopefully be later this week or early next. And so once that kicks off, it'll set off the series of public information sessions. You see, I'm hoping to have 4 of them, probably around quarterly, where everybody can be involved. They will most likely be virtual, but we might look at other options as well, including sometimes taking perhaps a traveling show to different regions as we do it to make sure that we are reaching everybody. The work groups will meet from April through September. Like I said, these deep dives are going to be quick. They're going to go in and then they're going to come back out with these action plans, which are due on September 30th. We will draft up a report by the end of this year and set it out for public comment. One of the things I'm considering and would love your input on is to do some listening sessions for that too, once it comes out, to go around to different regions, talk about the recommendations that came out, and just get community perspective on all of that. Next slide, please. Wanted to make it extra clear that the action plans are due because as I turn it over to Robin, who is up next, the medium heavy duty action plan is included in here. So the work that Robin is going to be doing with her team is going to be something that will convene and end by September 30th. So Robin, take it away. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, members of the board. I appreciate you allowing me a couple of seconds here to give you a brief update on the medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle MOU. The last time Mike Aberzinskis and I spoke with you, it was in February of 2021. And I'm just going to give you a brief recap of what this MOU is, and then I'll dive into where we are now. So the MOU, the goals of the MOU is to have 30% sales of the medium and heavy duty vehicles be zero emission by 2030, and 100% of those sales of those vehicles by 2050. We're working with a national organization called NESCOM, and they pulled together 15 different states. And I believe it's now 16 because Virginia joined as well. Virginia signed on as well. But just to remind you, medium and heavy duty vehicles are the trucks like your Amazon Prime vehicles, your UPS box trucks, your Pepsi delivery trucks that, goes to the different stores and delivers the soda, all the way up to an 18-wheeler tractor trailer. So we're not talking light duty here. We're talking the bigger ones, typically the ones that run on diesel fuel. So NESCOM has developed since we last spoke, NESCOM developed a draft action plan and they shared it with the multi-state task force. And we've provided comments on those. This draft action plan has environmental justice and equity included throughout the plan. And it's very, and that's their main goal, was to make sure that they were including environmental justice. It included input from the Moving Forward Network, MJ Bradley Associates, and of course, all of the different states who were involved. From your group, we are very grateful to have had Marilyn Marsh Robinson and William Barber III help us provide some feedback to NESCOM on this draft action plan. And we also had our interagency, what we're calling our interagency work group, provide feedback. And that was NCDEQ, NCDOT, DOA, Commerce, and the governor's office. Next slide, please. So the next steps for this plan are NESCOM will release this draft action plan for public comment at either the beginning of March, like the end of this week, or beginning of next week. It's going to be very soon now. The comment period will be open for 60 to 90 days. I'm not sure of that timeline just yet. They only wanted to leave it open for 30 days, and they've got a lot of pushback from the states. So they're going to think about how long they'll leave it open for. What we're asking help on is how to equitably share this action plan throughout North Carolina so that we can get feedback from all the groups involved in North Carolina. So I'm open to hearing those. You don't have to answer immediately. But after that, NESCOM will take that information back, and then they will make a final plan. Now, this plan is a menu of options. Not everything in this plan are things that we could adopt, and we know that. But we're looking for partners. We're looking for people who will help us. EJ and equity liaisons for the work group that I will be leading, that Jen alluded to. I would like to know if we have contacts with warehouse distribution centers. I already know people at Clean Cities Coalitions, health organizations, an expert from an impacted community. That would be extremely helpful because I need that voice. We need that. Everyone needs that voice. The final plan will be developed, like Jen mentioned, by September 30th to align with the Clean Transportation Plan. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jen to close this out.
Great. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you.
And I was remiss in saying thank you to Robin because she's heading up one of the largest work groups with a lot of work in front of us. So I really appreciate Robin's work on all of this and helping us to get this into the Clean Transportation Plan. So thank you, Robin. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to wrap it up. I don't know how much time we have left, but you know, both Robin and I would love to hear your thoughts, advice, either now or in the future, about helping to design community listening sessions, helping us to identify the communities, identify the people and organizations to attend, identify topics. We want these to really be things that are driven by the community and not by either the Department of Transportation or the Department of Air Quality. And specifically to identify people to be involved in these deep dive work groups, whether it's the medium heavy duty work group working with Robin or any of the other 4 work groups. We will have a state liaison leading each of them. And we know we would really appreciate any input that we can get that helps us to create the best action plans that we can. So I guess I will leave there. Our contact information is on the next slide, but if we do have the time, Madam Chairwoman, it would be great to talk a little bit about this if people have ideas.
First of all, let me thank you, Ms. Weiss and Ms. Robin, for presenting. And I will say in general that all of the presentations today have been packed with so much useful information, and all of them, I believe, show the model for community, the underserved, equity, and all those terms, we're hearing them. So we just have to make sure that there's a follow through. And we are happy, to provide any kind of assistance we have, as you've already seen, so many of us have been involved. So thank you very much. And so if there are questions, we'd be, the board members can ask you, but I'd like to remind you that when you start asking questions, you will be going into your break period. So you can decide how much you want to ask based on that. Are there any questions? Oh, so I didn't have to say all of
Madam
that.
Chair, Madam Chair, I'll just do a real quick one. Are you guys presenting at the North Carolina League of Municipalities City Vision coming up in April?
No, but I would be happy to.
I'm not in charge of it. I'm just a participant as a member of a town council. But I'm thinking that if you're, you need to get local officials read in on this, that would probably be like, being able to do a shotgun and hit a whole bunch of us at once.
That would be great. So you said in April? Okay.
It's April 26th through 28th in Wilmington.
Thank you.
Oh, you'll have to twist my arm to go to Wilmington.
Madam Vice Chair.
Yes.
It's Jeff Anstead. I think, I know in March we have a Unity conference. Indian Unity conference is held each year. That will be a great time to sit down with tribal leaders in the state and introduce this plan too, so they can have some knowledge and it not be secondhand knowledge. And I also, Jeff Anstead, be willing to serve on one of them committees.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. I'll follow up with you to find out the specifics of that conference. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? So I have a question. I was wondering, I was trying to take notes and I don't think I was very good at doing that. I'm wondering if those, the presenters, not you, Veronica, but the presenters could we get those PowerPoints? Is there a way that we could get those? Okay, thank you very much. Because I think they're already, since someone is handling that, they're already within DEQ, so that wouldn't be difficult. So thank you so much. Well, if there are no other questions, I want to again thank all of the presenters for today. And I also would like to entertain a motion for adjournment.
Madam Vice Chair, before we adjourn, can I make one quick reminder?
Sure.
As with Veronica's committee, Chair Johnson asked me to share a Cumulative Impacts Committee, and I'd welcome any of the EJE board members to join that committee. Hopefully we will have a meeting by the middle of this month so that we can start talking about cumulative impacts. We've heard it more than enough today, but we've heard it before today, and it's clear that we need to move forward on putting together some recommendations that we can present at the May EJE board meeting. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, Ms. White Williamson. Anything else, anybody? Can I get a motion, please, for adjournment?
Madam Vice Chair, I have one thing. This is Marilyn. I just wanted to ask any of the DEQ staff if there was a status on the Reggie EJ analysis that was gonna be sent to us for review. We may have been updated and maybe I just missed an email or something.
Actually, I saw that in the minutes. I did see that in the minutes too.
Marilyn, we have not sent anything out yet, but definitely keep an eye out for that coming up. But you have not missed anything at this point.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, are we done? May I get that motion, please?
Yes, this is Naima, and I would like to make the motion that we adjourn for our break.
Thank you, Naima. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
Second.
Veronica.
Okay, all in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
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 Opposes by the same sound. The motion carries. We are adjourned at 4:47 p.m. We will return at 5 p.m. to take public comments until 6 p.m. And according to Renee, we have a pretty heavy schedule. Okay.
Yeah.
See you at 5. Welcome back, everyone. We will now transition to the public comment segment of our meeting. We have 20 people who have signed up to speak, and Ms. Kramer will announce the names in the order in which the requests were received. She will also announce who is on deck to comment next. Everyone will have 3 minutes to provide their comments. If there's time remaining, we will provide an opportunity to those who wish to share comment with us as follows. Ms. Kramer will ask participants to use the raise hand feature, and it's located on the WebEx screen using a computer, or you can dial *3 if you're using a phone to listen in. Leave those hands raised until Ms. Kramer calls on you to share your comment so we can proceed as smoothly as possible. Thank you. And now, Ms. Kramer.
Thank you. All right, so first up this evening, we have Kay Raybould, followed by Anita Cunningham. Kay Raybould, you've been unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hello, my name is Kay Raybould. I live in the Tuscarora and Catawba Indigenous Peoples lands of present-day Raleigh, and I'm a member of APPLE, the Alliance to Protect the People and Places We Live. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. 1 week ago, I gave testimony to the North Carolina DEQ with opposition about the air quality permit being considered for the chicken waste and wood chip facility in Lumberton called North Carolina Renewable Power. I urged DEQ, along with dozens of others in the hearing, to deny the permit to this dirty and harmful facility and to permanently close the facility. I won't read my entire testimony, but the focus was on the numerous violations of this facility, their refusal to install air monitoring technology, and the severe health hazards the pollution from this facility caused the community. Cumulative impact is just another issue. I would like the board to urge DEQ to stop approving air and water permits for dirty industries in North Carolina, such as this one. I hope the board will urge DEQ, the governor, and the North Carolina Attorney General to monitor and regulate the poultry industry, biogas, and biomass facilities in the state. Environmental justice and cumulative impact must be considered when these polluting companies initiate an application with DEQ. There's an urgent need to end the expansion of biomass and biogas facilities in the state. Black, brown, indigenous, and low-income communities continue to suffer poor health and a diminished quality of life from the impact caused by wood pellet plants, factory farms with their polluting hog and chicken waste, and the degradation of the air, soil, and water where they live. I'm asking the board to urge the DEQ and the governor to review the definition of renewable and understand that biomass and biogas are not renewable energies. The health and well-being of thousands of North Carolinians is at stake, and I believe your leadership can make a significant difference in protecting the health and the environment of communities impacted by dirty industries in the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay Raybold. Up next, we have Anita Cunningham, followed by Connor Kippy. Anita Cunningham, you have been unmuted. You may begin.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Anita Cunningham, and I'm a resident of Lumberton, North Carolina, here in Robeson County. And I am also a member of the Impacted Communities Against Wood Pellets Coalition. Thank you for hearing from me today. I live less than 2 miles from the wood pellet plant, North Carolina Renewable Power, which is also located in Lumberton, that is burning wood chips, chicken cakes, and chicken parts. Wood pellets are not a renewable source of energy. Anything you burn is not renewable. The wood pellet companies are living off the government subsidies that the state provides. They are causing massive deforestation, trees that we need to help absorb carbon monoxide and helps with the absorption when the flood waters of hurricanes come. The burning of those wood pellets adds to the air and water pollution, as well as polluting the lungs of many of my community members, I suspect. I am imploring you to close the North Carolina Renewable Power wood pellet plant. It is not a good neighbor, and it is also not a part of Governor Cooper's climate plan. I would also ask that you hold a special session this year on the impacts of wood pellets on our communities. It's time to educate the public on the harmful effects of this business and other wood pellet companies in our North Carolina, on our North Carolina citizens, and they have no business here. Please shut down the North Carolina Renewable Power Plant as soon as possible. Thank you for your time, and I relinquish the rest of my time.
Thank you, Anita Cunningham. Up next, we have Connor Kippy, followed by Stephen Norris. Connor, I do not see your name. If you have called in via a phone line, if you could press *3 to raise your hand. All right, I do not see anyone raising their hand, so we'll come back at the end and see if Connor Kippy is here. Up next, we have Stephen Norris, followed by Terry Coleman. Stephen Norris, if you are here via phone, please press *3 so you can raise your hand. All right, we do have a hand raised.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Stephen Norris, you may begin.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Dr. Stephen Norris. I'm the president of APPLE, the Alliance to Protect the People and the Places We Live. I live on stolen Cherokee land near Asheville, North Carolina. I thank this advisory board profusely for the work you're doing. I think some of the work you're doing is some of the most important work going on in North Carolina and in the country as a whole. I would love to see North Carolina become the environmental justice capital of the country. Whether that's possible or not, I don't know. Right now, I think North Carolina is in danger of becoming the biomass capital of the world because of the exponential growth which we are seeing in North Carolina, especially in eastern North Carolina, of the various biomass facilities. And you've heard already this afternoon about North Carolina Renewable Power. There's a lot more that could be said, which was said last week, of course, in the hearing that the Department of Environmental Quality held about the permit. But we've also heard recently about the AERP facility, wood pellet facility in Robeson County, biochar in Hamlet, Align LNG in Zeppelin County, North Carolina Renewable Power. Duke is also planning to produce methane with and put it into pipelines with cow waste. We also know there's other things like the landfill that was discussed earlier today, coal ash, and various and multiple ways in which biomass is being misused, in some instances being labeled as renewable, as Kay Rebold just said, and something's got to be done about this, or North Carolina may become the biomass capital of the United States, and perhaps even in the world, given the amount of concentration. Of course, we have heard a lot today about cumulative impacts. This is very, very important and must be addressed in various ways. There are various impacts of this biomass development. One is it wreaks havoc on the communities where it's produced and in the neighborhoods, of course. And we've heard multiple statements about that, especially in regard to the Align misnamed renewable natural gas project there in eastern North Carolina, making methane from hog waste. We know it impacts environmental quality hugely through air pollution and water pollution. We haven't talked about that much today, but clearly water quality is a big issue for this board and for Department of Environmental Quality. And we all know what happens when hog farms are hit by superstorms that end up flooding the hog, what they call lagoons, another misnamed
Thank you,
category.
Mr. Norris. Thank you. Your time has come to a close. You are welcome to submit written comments to ej@ncdnr.gov, and the board will receive those as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to add, climate change is a huge impact of this kind of activity too. Thank you.
Up next, we have Tari Coleman, followed by Sam Neely. Hi, Tari Coleman.
Yes.
Hi, you may begin.
Hi, and thank you so much for your time. I would like to echo the speaker before me and thank this group for the work that you've been doing in holding the Department of Environmental Quality accountable. That's very, very valuable work. My name is Tari Coleman. I use she and they pronouns. I'm currently the Director of Community and Cultural Engagement for the North Carolina Climate Justice Collective. And I grew up in the Hope Mills area. If y'all are unfamiliar with where that is, it's right near Fayetteville. It butts up to Parkton. It has some ties in Grays Creek, which is another small rural area. I spent a lot of time rowing through forests that don't exist anymore because this community is plagued by biomass. And there are companies such as NCRP, that's North Carolina Renewable Power, that focus on wood pellets and burning poultry cake and things like that that are very disruptive and destructive to the environment, and that lead to air pollution that are very, very harmful to the residents. I can't ignore the fact that I have many relatives that recently are getting into their later years and they are suffering from strokes and COPD. And they're not people that smoke. And those are definitely effects of air pollution. They're heavily implicated in things like that. And I just want to advocate for this community, for my community, and to urge this group, this board, to deny the permit for NCRP and permanently close that facility and stop the harms that are happening to these communities. I went to high school with a lot of people that had asthma, like a lot of young people that had asthma. And it was really, really confusing to me when I moved to this area, all of the people that were plagued with different respiratory issues. And I really didn't understand where it was coming from until I got a little bit older and was able to study and really understand what was happening with the burning of different things and what happens when we inhale these things. Like, we know what happens when we exist in buildings that have mold and that have different inhalants that are dangerous to our health. And there's no reason that we let people live in buildings like that. And so there's no reason that we should allow companies like NCRP to continuously pollute our communities in very similar ways. So I would really, really love to urge this board that does do amazing work to deny the permit to this group and to permanently close this facility to help our community and to help us stay strong and advocate for us to be as successful as humanly possible and to stop these oppressive forces that continuously plague BIPOC communities. And I'd love to yield the rest of my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tari Coleman. Up next, we have Sam Neely, followed by Amanda Strouderman. Sam Neely, if you are on the phone, if you could please press *3 to raise your hand. All right, I don't see Sam Neely. We will move on to Amanda Strouderman, followed by Kaylin Peterson. Amanda Strouderman, you've been unmuted.
Hi, my name is Amanda Strouderman, and I'm with Clean Water for North Carolina. I'd like to speak about meaningful public participation. I want you to envision your home community for a minute. Just think about your family, your friends, your neighbors. Imagine somehow somebody in your circle sees a newspaper announcement that there's a public hearing about an air permit for a facility in your neighborhood. You read the permit, but the thing is so technical that it's barely understandable. So you get to talking and asking around for someone who can interpret it. And what you find out is that this facility is bad news. They've got a long history of violations, been fined several times for illegally emitting some nasty air pollution. So what do? Well, you get just people together and you get ready for this hearing where you plan to tell the Department of Environmental Quality that you don't want these bad actors to get another chance to keep polluting. The people that you know are already struggling with asthma and lung disease, and this county, in fact, ranks last for health outcomes in the entire state. And you find out, by the way, that this facility is located where its neighbors are 90% Black and Indigenous, and you want to let DEQ know that you don't think that's right. So you show up for the meeting and you hope to have others there that you've invited as well, but you can't really see each other. And one of the first things that DEQ says in an announcement is that only comments related to the actual permit, essentially technical suggestions for how to alter or improve it, are going to be recorded for public record. Now, you can still make your comments about health concerns and combined impacts from other polluters in the area. You can talk about environmental justice, but no one outside this meeting will have the benefit of hearing you because those comments aren't recorded or taken into account when considering the authorization of this permit. Now, I ask you, when and where then can communities have their concerns heard? If our state permitting agency doesn't have the authority to deny permits to protect communities, then who does? This is a plea for meaningful participation. And what that means is that the people's concerns actually carry weight, that there is an avenue to reject polluting industries that would bring more burden to already overburdened communities. This story is true. It's happening now in Robeson County with the NCRP permit, but also in communities across North Carolina. The people need you to hear their voices, but more than that, they need an appropriate response. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Amanda Strouderman. Up next, we have Kaylin Peterson, followed by Emma DeAngeli. Kaylin Peterson, if you are on the phone, if you could please press *3 to raise your hand. All right, we can come back to Kaylin Peterson. Up next, we have Emma DeAngeli, followed by Carol Caldwell. Emma DeAngeli, you've been unmuted.
Gotcha. Good evening, everyone. My name is Emma DeAngeli. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm about to complete my Master's of Environmental Management at Duke University in May. I'm on the leadership team for Duke University Environmental Justice Network, and I've focused on climate change and equity throughout my education. I wanted to thank you all for the work that you're doing to advance environmental justice in North Carolina and for being here today. If I've learned anything from my classes, it's that community participation is vital for equitable policies. I only knew one thing about North Carolina before I moved here. When I used satellite observations to analyze the trends in methane over the US for a project my junior year, I saw a huge positive anomaly in North Carolina in the summer. After comparing maps from possible methane sources to explain this anomaly, I determined the likely explanation. North Carolina's hog population. Clearly, large swine facilities have hugely detrimental impacts on the environment. The second thing I learned about North Carolina was that it is the birthplace of environmental justice. I feel lucky to live in a state with a history of resilience and determination among its inhabitants. However, I've also learned about the devastation that concentrated animal feed operations have on North Carolinians, particularly low-income communities and communities of color. I've learned about how large swine operations have worsened local water quality with few repercussions due to lack of monitoring. And I've learned about how the aerosols from swine operations infiltrate people's homes, creating an inescapable stench, and how they cause numerous respiratory illnesses in surrounding communities. As the Honorable Chair of this committee said in a letter to DEQ Secretary Beiser, biogas produced using the lagoon and spray field system is not a clean source of energy. The implications that it has for damaging local groundwater and surface water quality should be enough for the DEQ to seek alternatives for mandated greenhouse gas reductions. Further, as my Professor Reich Longus noted in a 2020 article, demand for biogas creates incentives for more CAFOs to produce more waste. The North Carolina DEQ must rethink their biogas permitting to ensure that environmental justice concerns are properly heeded. Thank you for your time, and I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Emma DeAngeli. Up next, we have Carol Caldwell, followed by Denzel Burnside. Carol Caldwell, you've been unmuted. You may begin.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Carol Caldwell. I am from Whiteville, North Carolina in Columbus County. I retired a little more than a year and a half ago from the Columbus County Dream Center, where I served as executive director for 12 years. The Dream Center is known in Columbus County and throughout the Cape Fear region as a 30-year-old organization devoted to working on disparities involving health, economics, and education. The North Carolina Inclusive Disaster Recovery Network, known as Insider, is a coalition of 400 members representing community advocacy groups and allied partners that formed after Hurricane Matthew in an effort to lift up community voices in the recovery space. The group meets monthly to share resources and address policy concerns, and staff support is provided by Rural Forward in partnership with MDC. Insider formed a research group team of 8 network members last year to discuss equitable community engagement. The research team's membership of the network represents community voices working in and with our churches, farm workers, local community crisis centers, leadership hubs, and empowerment centers. And the research that we are doing is supported in part by the Environmental Defense Fund. During the next 18 months, the state will develop a flood resilience blueprint that will prioritize flood mitigation funding at the local level for many years to come. This is a time where we hope to lay out a process of community engagement going beyond outreach that listens to all voices so that we get it right and no one is left behind. We are preparing a community engagement framework centered on equity and informed on our members' professional and personal experiences of living and working with communities repeatedly impacted by flood disasters. We hope that the Department of Environmental Quality will consider our recommendations that weigh engagement processes through the lens of environmental justice and equity. We plan to come back to this body in the next quarter with a detailed set of recommendations that can also be applied to multiple state and local planning processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol Caldwell, for your time. Up next, we have Denzel Burnside, followed by Maple Osterbrink. Denzel Burnside, I do not see your name on the list. If you could please raise your hand or press *3. All right, we'll come back to Denzel Burnside. All right, so next then we have Maple Osterbrink, followed by Kathy Buckley. Maple Osterbrink, you have been unmuted. You may begin.
Oh, okay, I see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I didn't know, nothing was showing up there. All right. Yeah, I live in Chapel Hill, and I'm glad to see everybody. There's some different people on the board and some familiar faces. I come when I can. I am a member of Apple as well and a lot of other groups. I volunteer for NC Warren, so I've tried to help with the problems in the state and see what's going on and why we have pollution. That's our goal, right? To get rid of pollution. So I did work against the Atlantic Coast Pipeline for 3.5 years of my life every day. And I'm saying that because the emissions, the methane leakage and emissions was going to be the same as the Executive Order 80 is projected to save, right? So the numbers they came up with would have been the same as that pipeline. So I wouldn't have had to spend all that time if politically things were not so political, right? And this isn't the only state, but if we just had some kind of influence, and maybe your equity board can do that. Maybe you can influence the lawmakers who don't make too many laws because there's a lot of fighting. Unfortunately, we call them lawmakers, but do they make law, federal as well, right? Are they making laws? No, because they clash with each other. So we'd like some good laws. And I have examples that I've come across that are just nonsensical. We need our agencies to work together. I heard the gentleman talking before about, let's coordinate. And yeah, we need that because there's funneling and departments, not only nonprofits and corporations do that, but, of course, governments do too. And wouldn't it be good to get more coordination? For example, so a county, NC Conservation Network, who she was on your board. She's a fabulous lawyer. I don't see her name today, but she told me in 2017 that one of the North Carolina counties were not going to require vehicle emissions anymore because, their county levels supposedly fell below a certain pollution level. So then now nobody has to check their vehicles for pollution anymore. I mean, just things like that make no sense. If science was in charge and people in different departments and legislators actually had to talk about coordinating and for not just the state and the county level, but planet, that nobody would say that makes any sense at all. But these are the things that slip through and get passed. No wind power allowed. How did that happen? Is science running the show there? No. And was there a hearing that made sense with people who know? I don't know. I can't keep up with every moment, but that was political. Even the military said wind power makes sense. It's not going to, they said, it's going to bother the Air Force. The Air Force said, no, it's not. There's no water testing. There's no testers available. So Clean Water for North Carolina uses their budget for, water testers that the state of North Carolina should give to people who need it, groups, towns. We should have air monitors. We should have water testers. This shouldn't be a problem. And so maybe they don't want us to test because then we would say, this goes over the levels. These shouldn't be allowed, and then the businesses are in charge again. And
Thank you, Maple. Unfortunately, your time has come
that's
to
my
an
point.
end.
So let's coordinate. Thank you.
Yeah, you can provide written comments at
I will send
EJ.
it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Up next, we have Kathy Buckley, followed by Jerome Wagner. Kathy Buckley, you have been unmuted. You may begin.
Kathy Buckley, and I am the staff to the North Carolina Alliance to Protect Our People in the Places We Live, Apple. And before I begin my remarks, I would like to make a suggestion that you ask the Department of Commerce Secretary to come before your board and talk about his EJ program and how he decides where money should be given to dirty industry. I'd like to thank all the previous speakers and note that I agree with every single thing I've heard tonight. Kay, Anita, Steve, Terry, Amanda, Emma, Carol, Maple. So I'm going to skip a lot of the details that I had. But I do want to talk a little bit about dirty energy, the North Carolina renewable power, the wood pellets, the swine gas. What they have in common is that they're all incredibly expensive. They're all incredibly dirty. The NCRP actually pollutes more than a coal factory does. And they're all fake clean energy. they actually push real clean energy out of the way. And the joke is going to be on us because you can't fool Mother Nature. We're putting pollution up there, whether we call it clean energy or not. And I was thinking this morning that, you know what, if we had a law that said dirty factories have to be located in high-income areas, then not only would we not have this problem in our EJ communities, but we would have cleaned up dirty industry by now, or we would have decided that we don't really need as much stuff as we think we do. So I would like to thank the advisory board for listening, for your service here and elsewhere, and for your very unique advocacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy Buckley, for speaking. Up next, we have Jerome Wagner, followed by Emily Zucchino. Jerome Wagner, you've been unmuted. You may begin.
Very good. Thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Jerome Wagner. I reside in Concord, North Carolina, on land formerly nurtured by the Catawba peoples. I'm the lead organizer for 350 Charlotte, which is an all-volunteer climate action and climate justice-focused group centered in Charlotte. I'm also a board member of the group NC Apple, which has been named a number of times already. I remember the advisory board's exemplary engagement on the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and remain very pleased with the final outcome there, that having been the discontinuation of that project. I know that the board's input was significant in that process. I may not have been a routine attendee due to other priorities, but I remain very optimistic about the perspectives and impact that you as the advisory board can offer in our important issue areas. I speak today on the environmental devastation going on in eastern North Carolina. I note the denuding of landscapes through the cutting of trees for conversion to exported biomass fuels. I note the CAFOs, which cause toxic exposures to proximate communities and consequent health impacts. I'm aware of renewable natural gas projects, which on one hand will beneficially reduce the atmospheric discharges of methane, but which on the other hand seek to commercialize yet another dirty fuel. I note that Dr. Courtney Wood's presentation given earlier in this meeting underscores concerns also in eastern North Carolina, those including chemical pollution from landfills. I simply ask that the Environmental Justice Advisory Board establish in the very near future a concentrated and ongoing focus on eastern North Carolina and the industry assaults being landed there. I assert that environmental injustices are in process and that you can lend important protection to those communities. Thank you for your service to the people of the state, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jerome Wagner. Up next, we have Emily Zucchino, followed by Belinda Joyner. Emily Zucchino.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to give comment tonight. My name is Emily Zucchino, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement at Dogwood Alliance. Sorry, I've got my little 4-month-old here joining in. I've given public comment to this advisory board in the past regarding the environmental injustices of the wood pellet industry in our state. And I've heard several of you express concern and a desire for more information. Like my other colleagues have said tonight, I'm grateful for the work this advisory board has done in making recommendations on the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and biogas. I'm requesting that the EJ Advisory Board hold a special session on wood pellets. North Carolina is the largest exporter of wood pellets in the nation. As one gentleman said earlier, the biomass capital of the US. Yet there has never been any public or policy discourse to analyze the impacts of this industry or educate the public of the impacts of this industry. The wood pellet industry is having a detrimental impact on our state and our climate. Several people have commented on these impacts already, so I won't repeat them here. Last year, North Carolina was the subject of several major media pieces, including from CNN and The New Yorker, and I'll send those by email following this meeting in case anyone wants to read further information about the industry in the state. Over the past year, many of us working to oppose the wood pellet industry have formalized our coalition, operating under the name Impacted Communities Against Wood Pellets. Our coalition is comprised of residents from counties with existing and proposed wood pellet facilities, and we have researched and developed a series of actions that Governor Cooper and his administration, including NCDEQ, can take to stop the expansion of this industry in North Carolina. Our hope is that this EJ Advisory Board can hold a special session on wood pellets and to make recommendations to DEQ based on the outcomes of this special session. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Emily Sakina. Up next, we have Belinda Joyner, followed by Jefferson Curry II.
My problem, like I say, hats off to the advisory board. My problem is not with the advisory board. My problem is with DEQ. I listened to Dr. Woods and all the stuff that she presented, and how many times have all this stuff been presented to DEQ in the past? We talk about the wood pellet. I'm a home to Enviva. We've had people from DEQ and the advisory board to come right here to Northampton County. They visited homes where an 80-year-old lady told them the hazards that the wood pellet is presenting. And I look at North Carolina, Enviva right now is proposing 2 more wood pellet plants in the state of North Carolina. And I feel like that's due to the fact that it's a dumping ground. DEQ allows whatever to come in, and they know this, so they don't bother with other states, because the other states take into consideration the cumulative impacts that it's having on their community. We have no one that could take into consideration our cumulative impacts. If you come before the board, and I've been in that office, I know 4 or 5 meetings, and I mean, that's been 3 or 4 years ago, and we're still getting the same results. So my thing is, who's listening? Who's doing what? When you get the same thing. I looked at Dr. Woods, and we've been talking about Sampson County at the environmental justice meeting for the last 10 years, and they're still going through the same thing now that they were going through then. So who's doing what? Why do we have DEQ? Is it just to permit these big companies to come in and then pollute our communities? Just like the lady said, if they wanted to come in a community of what they call an upstanding community, then they wouldn't be allowed, because no, we don't want this in our community. The same way they don't want that in their community, we don't want it in our community, but it's being done because we have not a voice in Raleigh to speak up for our communities, as if we are not human beings. So DEQ, you're very disappointing to me. I have no faith in what you're doing. The advisory board, I thank you, because when I came before you and talked about the pipeline, Reverend, can't think of the minister's name, he stood up and made a recommendation that day. But since then, Renee, all of you have been here, and we're still getting those same results. Nothing has changed. So my thing is, when are we going to get somebody that to take in consideration? I listened to Mr. Bellamy said about the stakeholders input. This should have been something that had been happening years ago, because we're the ones that are directly affected by what's in our communities. You don't live here, so you can't tell my story. You don't know my story. And apparently you don't care about our stories, because the same thing that was happening then is still happening now. We need somebody that's going to represent people as a whole, and not these large companies with all this money, because it's our tax dollars that are paying your salary before they ever started to come here. Thank you.
Thank you, Belinda Joyner. Up next, we have Jefferson Curry II, followed by Will Hendrick. And Jeff Curry, I don't see you. If you're on the phone, if you could please press *3. Otherwise, we can come back to you at the end. And that looks like what we're going to be doing. So up next, we have Will Hendrick, followed by Sally McLean. One moment, Will, while I unmute you, and you are unmuted and you may begin.
Good evening. Thank you, Renee. I'm Will Hendrick with the North Carolina Conservation Network, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment tonight. Since the prevailing definition of environmental justice contemplates both meaningful involvement and fair treatment of all North Carolinians, I want to begin by commending the recent efforts of DEQ's Division of Water Infrastructure to promote the equitable allocation of water and wastewater infrastructure funds. Yes, they've conducted public outreach, and staff are conducting trainings and partnering with NGOs to educate the public about upcoming funding opportunities. But more than just conducting public outreach, that division proposes final action that specifically aims to address systemic inequity, shows a willingness to make decisions actually informed by community input, and ultimately seems genuinely interested in advancing environmental justice. In stark contrast, unfortunately, when DEQ isn't proposing to issue grants, but instead to issue permits, the agency's commitment to fair treatment is noticeably lacking. In the permitting context, DEQ efforts to advance environmental justice seem to prioritize public input rather than public protection. But public involvement is not meaningful if public concerns are ignored when an agency proposes or finalizes a decision. For instance, I applaud this board for making both procedural and substantive recommendations to DEQ about the development of the swine biogas general permit. Yet, while DEQ heeded many of your procedural recommendations, it completely ignored your recommendations about the actual terms of the permit. Yes, it matters that DEQ is providing more time before the public hearings, conducting them in person, and extending the comment period. But it matters far less when the draft permit ignores the lived experience that public comments might emphasize. It matters less when the proposed decision demonstrates a failure to consider the cumulative and discriminatory impacts that permit issuance will allow to persist. When the impacts like these are ignored by DEQ, environmental justice cannot be achieved no matter how many hearings are held or how many comments are received. Ultimately, it's good that DEQ has a public participation plan, and it's good that it has a mapping tool used to identify underserved communities. But it's sad that the agency can point to a community needing enhanced engagement, but doesn't have a policy in place to evaluate whether cumulative impacts borne by local residents demand enhanced protection. DEQ can identify communities of color or low income, but doesn't have a policy telling staff how to evaluate or respond to disparate adverse impacts borne by these vulnerable North Carolinians. As such, I'm very interested in this board's forthcoming recommendations about how to operationalize the consideration of cumulative impacts. But I fear those substantive recommendations may also be ignored unless something changes at DEQ. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that change happens, because ultimately environmental justice still requires not just meaningful involvement, but also fair treatment of North Carolinians. Thank you.
Thank you, Will Hendrick. Up next, we have Sally McLean, followed by Blakely Hildebrandt. Sally McLean, if you are on the phone, if you could please press *3 to raise your hand. Okay, we will come back and see if Sally is available later. Up next, then, we have Blakely Hildebrandt. Blakely Hildebrandt, you've been unmuted. You may begin.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Blakely Hildebrandt. I'm an attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center, and I appreciate the chance to offer comments tonight. I also wanted to welcome Ms. Whittington to the board. Congratulations on your appointment to the board. I wanted to bring to this board's attention that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency last month accepted a civil rights complaint filed by SELC on behalf of the Duplin County NAACP and the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign, which sends a strong about what Mr. Hendrick was just speaking about the potential disparate impact of biogas operations that use a lagoon and spray field system on communities of color in Eastern North Carolina. And this complaint asks EPA to investigate the discriminatory impact of pollution and adverse health risks, including premature death, that these biogas producing hog operations will impose on Black and Latino communities in Eastern North Carolina. This is a really important development as DEQ prepares a one-size-fits-all general permit for hog operations that want to produce biogas. And we think that EPA's acceptance of this complaint signals that DEQ's biogas permits in the past and in the future may have a discriminatory impact on people of color in the state. And we hope that DEQ will take that seriously and implement protections in that permit, as this board has already advised. This board has played a really important role in pursuing environmental justice and centering DEQ on the community impacts of biogas. And we hope that this board will continue to keep this general permit for biogas at top of mind as DEQ develops this permit, which it is in the process of doing. There are 4 public hearings coming up in April and a public comment period that ends in May. And DEQ is expected to finalize this permit in early July. So again, want to thank this board for being so active on this really important environmental justice issue, and ask for the board to continue to engage with DEQ between your quarterly meetings as this really impactful permit is being developed, particularly with regard to the protections that must be included in order to protect communities of color in Eastern North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you, Blakely Hildebrandt. So we have come to the end of our pre-registered speakers. So I'm going to go back. I do not see any of the names that I had not seen before, but I will go back through that list. And if your name is called and you are here on the line, please raise your hand so I know, and I will unmute you and you can provide your comments. So we have Connor Kippy. We have Sam Neely, Halen Peterson, Denzel Burnside, and Jefferson Curry II. I will give about 30 seconds for them to.
And Sally McLean. Renee?
It's Sally McLean?
Yeah, I think you called Sally McLean and she didn't show.
Oh, and Sally McLean. Thank you. I think you're right. Good point. And Sally McLean. Apologies, I was getting ahead of myself and stopped making note of that. Okay, so we do not have any of those individuals who were not there the first time. So I will go ahead and allow for anyone else to raise their hand if you would like to speak and did not sign up. I know we have a few people who are interested. Okay, so we are going to start with Lib Hutchby. Lib Hutchby, you have been unmuted and you may begin.
Thank you so much. This is such a privilege to be with this group who focus on environmental justice. I'm Lib Hutchby and I'm with the Chapel Hill branch of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Apple, as well as 350 Triangle and other groups that are so caring about what happens to water. And so for you to focus today on water in Sampson County is so important and very educational. I wanted to thank you for that effort. I'm challenging the board tonight to pay attention to the fact that this is the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. And I wonder what you plan to do if you know, how do you want to bring attention to that? How is DEQ bringing attention to the fact that in March, this March 22nd is World Water Day, and also the need to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. So I can tell you that in planning for a World Water Day event, we discovered in Durham, in the city park called Northgate, that their creek is contaminated. Ellerby Creek is contaminated, and therefore the water activities that we had hoped that the children could participate in by actually wading in the water or touching the water cannot happen. So this is very upsetting, to say the least. that the water that's contaminated here, as we know, is flowing downstream. It's going into the Neuse River, and that's going to be their drinking water, right? Okay, so we know that Cape Fear is so terribly polluted. Who would dare take a fish out of it, except people who don't really understand that there should not be fishing there. So there needs to be signage all along these rivers and creeks that say, do not drink the water, do not fish. This is polluted. And I think DEQ needs to take responsibility to act on that. And I know that we've talked about many, many things, and the wood pellets, all of these are terribly polluting facilities. A landfill is like a landmine. It's terrible. The military bases are so polluted. They're like Superfund sites. So we know that these things are going on in North Carolina, and my time is running out, and I want to thank you for the privilege of being in your midst today to bring attention to World Water Day, which we will invite you to attend our event on the 26th from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock in Durham at the Northgate Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Liv Hutchby. Up next, it looks like we have Rachel Velez. Rachel Velez, you've been unmuted. You may begin.
Hi, thank you. My name is Rachel, and I'm with Clean Water for North Carolina. I appreciate the directives and goals of EO 246, as well as its focus on promoting environmental justice and community engagement during agency permitting decisions. There is much that needs to be done to clear up the current confusion about whether EJ impacts are not only considered, but also recorded during public comment periods and hearings. Under Title VI, no person shall, on the grounds of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. When hearing officers explicitly state at the beginning of public hearings that only comments related directly to the draft permit in question will be recorded, DEQ has already made the decision to omit voices of community members who will bear the burdens of pollution, adverse health impacts, and degraded quality of life. I asked Secretary Beiser and DEQ if community members, organizations, and interested parties are unable to voice EJ concerns during public hearings and comment periods, then when exactly should these comments be made? DEQ should not be held accountable for skirting the requirements of Title VI only when SCLC or other powerful law firms intervene. Draft permit environmental justice snapshots should not be just an afterthought. Community members shouldn't be told that their comments won't be recorded unless they speak to the incredibly technical facts and figures on these draft permits. I echo my colleagues Belinda Joyner and Amanda Strouderman's plea for meaningful participation, and I will yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for your comments. Is there anyone else? We have a little bit more time for anyone else.
Renee, I believe caller number 5 had their hand raised. I don't know if you'd already called on them or not.
I believe that is Stephen Norris from before, but I will double check. Let's double check. Hi, is this Stephen Norris or is this someone else?
No, this is Steve Norris. I don't know how I got confused with someone else. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Is there anyone else who would like to provide public comment? Okay, if not, then I will turn it back over to Vice Chairwoman Johnson Thompson. Oh, Marion Johnson Thompson, I'm sorry, you look like you are muted.
Okay, I'd just like to thank everyone for tonight. Thank our speakers at the meeting, as well as our community members and others who gave public comments. If there are no other comments, we will sign off. We've already adjourned our meeting. Any comments? Renee, do you have anything else to say?
No,
Okay.
if you're ready to go, then I think we can all go.
Okay. Have a good rest of the evening, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Thanks for participating to the public.